Welcome to this edition of When the Biomass hits the wind turbine, a discussion of sustainable living and what that means to you and me. Coming to you from WOUB Radio Studio B in Athens, Ohio. I'm Jay Warmke.
And I'm Annie
You
Warmke.
are, and today we're going to talk about the fact that that the age of fossil fuels is over.
Jay, stay here with
I
me.
know.
Stay
Or
focused.
the second title is It's the End of the World as We Know It.
And I feel fine.
I feel
There's
fine.
a song in there
I know
somewhere.
it's like a YouTube
Wow.
song, or REM. REM.
I'm worried about you.
I got to focus. All right. So I wanted to first talk about that basically what we're dealing with here is the fact that we're undergoing a huge change in our society, I mean worldwide, and because we're so close to it, we're just not aware of it.
What you mean? You and I are so
The
close.
all of us. It's sort of
So
like the
it's happening
analogy.
over here, but other things
Well,
happening over here.
the analogy I think of is, let's say 100 years ago, as the world was transitioning from the horse and buggy era to the automobile, people living through that period of time might be aware that automobiles exist, but they're not aware that this is a transformation.
Oh,
They
okay.
think, okay,
Mhm.
well, the rich guy down the street bought a car, but it's loud and it's noisy and it keeps breaking down. I've only seen one. There's no infrastructure. It's not going to happen. But 100 years later, we can look at it and say that was a monumental change, and that led to all of these other things that came after.
Like a ripple effect.
So we are in the post fossil fuel age. We are in the age of renewable energy, but most people just simply are not aware of it because they're close to it. They're not accepting. So just
I'm going to disagree. I
all
don't
right.
think they're close to it. I don't think
No, they're
they
too
care.
close.
They don't pay attention. They just want to turn the switch on and make it happen. They don't want to consider what
Mhm.
it costs anybody, including themselves.
All right. Well, let's not talk about how annoying human beings can be. So let me talk a little bit about the fossil fuel economy. So most of us think about, I mean, it's a common thing where you believe that the world is the way it is and has always been this way, but the world that we live in, the fossil fuel economy, is a relatively new phenomenon. It really began in something that we would recognize with the Industrial Revolution, which is only 100 or so years ago. And we've discussed this before. Like your grandfather, my grandfather, they were born at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So
So
it's
my
only,
grandfather was born in 1865.
yeah, and my grandfather was like 1879, something like
Yeah.
that. So it's only a couple of generations, yet we feel like it's been this way. And really, the modern fossil fuel economy has only been a post World War II fossil economy, fossil fuel economy. So many of us have heard of peak oil, Hubbert's peak oil, M. King Hubbert, who was a shell geologist who first discussed the idea that the world may run out of oil,
And
which,
this was in the 50s.
yeah, in the 1950s, he talked about how the United States might run out of oil. And he actually projected pretty close to the right year and the right date that we would hit peak oil right around 1970. And it's important to understand peak oil is not you're out of oil. Peak oil is that is the moment when you're producing the most oil that's ever going to be produced, and from that point on it goes downhill. So
So
it's
they
a
killed
curve.
him.
Yeah, well, they almost fired him. He was considered, a
He did
crazy
this at
man.
a conference or something where there were a lot of
Right.
people.
And they were saying, yeah, okay, that's crazy. But the problem is that he was right. So then later in the 1970s, he came back and he said, okay, the world will run out of oil. And he projected somewhere around 2003, somewhere in that
Run out of
range.
oil
Well,
or peak oil?
hit peak,
Okay.
and then begin to run out. And there's a lot of implications when you begin to run out. One is the fact that if there is a very small disconnect between supply and demand, then you will begin to see escalating prices. So if you have a 3% disconnect between supply and demand, 3% more demand than supply, the price of oil will double. So it doesn't take a lot of changes there to result in really big increases in price. So if the supply is declining by 3% every year, you would expect the price to double every year, which
Well,
becomes
we did see this in the 70s when
we've
gasoline went from 19 cents a gallon to $2.
right, and we've seen it periodically, but what typically tends to happen is people find other alternatives. And that's something we'll discuss.
Well, it took us a while.
So I would argue that right around 2010 the world hit peak oil. We are now in the post peak oil. We're in
Right.
the decline. You may get temporary increases in production, but the general trend will be downward and
So
is
how
downward.
does this apply to other fossil fuels like
Well,
coal and natural gas?
yeah, well, coal, we hit peak oil or peak coal in either 1974 or 1998, depending on how you want to measure
Well,
it.
what kind of coal? I
Yeah,
mean, 98.
if you're talking about in 74, we hit peak for energy content within coal. There's like different
So the
flavors of
amount
coal.
the amount of the best coal
Yeah, there's
producing the highest
anthracite, there's
BTU.
bitumen, there's
Uh-huh.
subbitumen, there's lignite.
Uh-huh.
So anthracite, all of that gets used up first. So, but in terms of volume of production, 1998. So we're well past peak coal, and the reason coal mines are shutting down is because first off, we've used up a lot of it, but also the cost of getting the remaining coal out of the ground is just too expensive compared to alternatives. We've with peak natural gas, we had what was referred, people talked about the fracking boom and all of that. The reality is that was they call it a enhanced extraction technique. I would call it a technology of desperation. When you get into that mode, you can extend the life of an industry by about 18 months, but then you see that decline
That's such a
continue.
bizarre, that is only about money.
Oh
It
yeah.
is never about what benefits anybody but those shareholders
Well,
and the
we
owners.
saw it with coal as it became more expensive and too expensive to mine it. Then you start getting into
Blowing
strip
up
mining. Then you
mountains.
do mountaintop removal, and then you close up shop and you blame Obama. That's the way you do it.
Well, that
So,
guy was guilty of
oh
everything.
yeah, I blame Obama for a lot.
Okay, good.
Nuclear energy is dead.
I don't
It's still
know.
there.
Man, they're subsidizing it like
Oh, well,
crazy.
yeah, of course. But that's just because of their lobbying. But really, since the mid 1970s, we haven't had any nuclear power plants built in the United States to speak of. There's been a couple of reactors built. Worldwide, really, the only places putting in nuclear power are dictatorships.
Like France is
Um,
not a
well,
dictatorship, but they love it
they have a
there.
lot of nuclear, but they aren't building new nuclear.
Uh-huh.
So we're seeing nuclear, and the main reason is it's just too expensive compared to the
Well,
alternatives.
also, if something goes wrong, everybody dies, including animals,
Okay,
insects, and the soil.
that's just collateral damage. No, we don't
Okay,
worry about that kind of thing. So
I
what
do.
does so we're seeing this industry, okay, this history of fossil fuels, which again, as I mentioned, is only in the last 100 years or so, it is going away. Jobs are going away, ways of life are going away, all because of simple economics. But what does the media do? What do people do? They give you this fear message.
Okay, so I want to say that I just saw headlines at Farm and Dairy, which is, not progressive in its
Okay.
thinking. And it says that the state of Ohio, this maybe it was last week or the week before, has now designated natural gas as green energy. And I thought that had already happened, but it
Why not?
says, like in you look at California where every new build has to be solar or some renewable energy. And then if you go around saying that gas is renewable energy, which a lot of places have tried to make that
It's
the
just simply lobbying. And well,
well,
there's
it's
always
but
a
it's not
pushback.
funny. They're making it happen.
Well, yeah, but it doesn't matter because it's going away. It's too expensive. There's always going to be a pushback as these changes. When you talk about silliness, Apparently, there were recently a number of whales that were washed up on the beaches up near New York. And so, what they've decided, or what the people are running around saying, is see, this is what happens when you build wind turbines offshore. Like
Oh,
somehow the whales are being killed by wind turbines. And there really aren't any wind turbines offshore up in that area anyway. They're just beginning the permitting process. So, and there was evidence that the whales were hit by boats, but it doesn't matter. I mean, you use
but climate
anything.
change could draw them off
Oh,
course.
sure,
I
or
mean,
whatever.
that's happening a
So
lot.
we're told to be afraid. We're told, and but I like the
Very, wait,
quote,
wait,
"Be very
very
afraid."
afraid.
Right, right. Right. So, but the quote that I always love from Winston Churchill is he says, "Americans will always do the right thing, but only after they've exhausted every alternative." So we've exhausted the alternatives. Now
Which is gas,
oil,
which
all the
is,
fossil fuels. Now we're moving into the age of renewables.
but wait, this is way too
But
positive. Way too
okay,
positive.
it's
What are
going to
you
be
doing
positive.
here? What are you doing here?
This is a positive message
Okay.
because we're oftentimes told that these things. I think there's a certain comfort in a lot of folks in feeling that the world is on the edge of disaster.
Well, I think we
I
learned
think
from infancy really to be scared of everything,
well, but
insects,
there's a
people.
there's a comfort there where you can then blame things. You can blame others. I also think that as people get older, they tend to believe that the world is coming to an end
Well,
because
their
they're
world
coming
is.
to an end, and it's hard to imagine the world exists beyond me. So
Seriously?
therefore,
Oh, come on. That
I'm
just
saying
seems so
me.
nice. I know
Yeah,
it, but that
but
seems so
no, but it's true.
outrageous.
That's why we have these Armageddon things every generation. People say the world can't exist without me. I'm clearly dying,
Wow.
so therefore the world is going to end. And yet the world continues on. So anyway, so let's not bog down in that. But what we're getting to is the fact that we are truly, truly, truly entering into the world, the age of renewable energy. And the thing I like to stress on this is we're moving into this world not because we're suddenly all good people who are trying to save the planet.
Yeah,
It is pure, simple economics. It
absolutely.
is in our self interest. And we always like
Well,
to say,
not
you
yours
will be
and
great.
mine. It's
No,
somebody else's that's
no,
making
it's
all the
everybody.
money.
It's society's self-interest is that the things that are the most economically viable today, the technology of energy that is the most economically viable also happens to be the technology that is the best for the planet, which is great. I mean, that's all good. It's like if you want to create a new power plant today, just as an example, I just saw a study by Duke Energy out of North Carolina. They found that to continue to operate a coal power plant, an existing coal power plant, costs twice as much as to build a brand new solar array. So
Meaning a
just the
commercial, big
yeah, utility
industrial.
scale. So just to maintain it and buy the fuel is twice the cost of building a brand new power plant, which is solar, which is non polluting. That is the
Well,
reason why these coal power plants are being shut down and a lot of solar is being installed. Pure, simple, greedy, selfish self interest.
right.
It's
But I
all good.
just want to make this point as a disclaimer before you do the station ID, and that is that it is not without its pollution. It is not
Okay.
without extraction.
There you go. You find comfort in disaster.
I do not. I want to be honest about the true
All
cost
right.
of all of it.
Good enough. Well, you are listening to When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine with Jay and Annie Warmke, coming to you from WOU Radio, OUB Radio, Studio B, reminding you it is indeed the end of the world as we know it.
And thank God.
Thank God. Okay, so I'm going to try and get through the renewables without Annie telling me that there are problems associated with this, because there are. But
Thank you.
I
Write
wish
that on the
I
calendar.
wish to
I'm
ignore
right. Oh my
these.
God, I'm right.
So what we find with renewable energy, and I've been going out touting Jay's law, like Moore's law, for a long time
We
about
don't know Moore's law.
Moore's law. Is the guy who used to start it up Intel said that the technology of microprocessing will the capacity will double every 18 months and the price will be cut in half. And it became a big deal and everybody looked at it and computers got better and better and cheaper and cheaper. Well, mine is that the price of renewable energy historically seems to cut in half every 3 years. The cost of fossil fuel continues to escalate. So when at some point you meet, which is referred to typically as grid parity, things begin to change, and they change in a dramatic way because the economics are now in favor of renewables. So we saw this happen in 2007 with utility scale wind, where at that point it became as cheap to build a wind turbine as to use existing fossil fuel. So we began to see fossil fuel or wind
Is that
turbines
what you mean by
installed.
it crossing?
Yeah, the price point crosses. And then every minute that goes on from that point, renewables gets cheaper in comparison to fossil fuel. So as time goes on, that gap gets wider and
And all
wider
the
and
people
wider.
go to that side of the ship then.
There you
Well,
go.
not yet, but they're getting there.
So we saw that 2007 with wind, and that's why you began seeing wind turbines. Then in 2012, it happened with solar. And we began to see solar prices getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper compared. Just to give you an example of how dramatically the price of solar has gone down over the years, in 1976, when I graduated from high school, woohoo, spirit of
It
76.
was a famous year.
Yeah, it was. We saw the price of solar was about $100 a watt. So what does that mean? If you had a 100-watt solar panel, it would cost wholesale about $10,000. Well, that's just not affordable. And the only people who could afford it were like NASA, Exxon, some of those
Jimmy
companies.
Carter
No,
put
he
it on the
put
White
solar
House.
thermal.
Oh, I
That was
thought he
heating.
put
No.
panels.
All right. So then in 2022, today or close to today, the price had fallen to about 25 cents a watt. So that same 100-watt panel that cost $10,000 in 76 now costs $25. So that is one of the
The game
reasons why.
changer.
Oh, it's huge. It's huge. So in 2008, the electric generation on the grid was about 50% coal. You know, about half of all power was coal. 22% was natural gas, 19% nuclear, and 6% hydro. And all of the wind, solar, geothermal, all those others accounted for about 2%. So that basically, other than hydro, renewables was almost non-existent. That's only what, 14, 15 years ago. Hydro has been around. Hydro was the
Well, for a
original
long time.
electricity in Niagara Falls
But even
and all.
before that.
Well, around World War II, hydro accounted for more than 50% of all of the electricity generated in the country. It didn't change a lot. It hasn't changed a lot. It's just changed in percentages because other power plants became more dominant, coal, natural gas specifically. So, fast forward 10 years, and we begin to see that coal has diminished a lot. Well, the reason is the price, and so it went from 48% down to 21. But the big news under that decade was that natural gas became the go-to for power companies. So natural gas went from 22 to 44. So
Right.
basically, when coal declined, they replaced it with natural
Yeah,
gas.
they billions of dollars invested in something that we all were saying, "Hey, why are you doing that?"
Right. Well, because
It's a
the guys who
transition.
run it, they're running it and they're looking at it and going, you know what, coal's getting more expensive, but I can just transition over to natural gas and run the thing the same way as I've always run it.
I'm so amazed they don't ever look into the future. I know
No.
back in 2006 or maybe 2007, we went to our electric co-op annual whatever, and they had a what do they call that? Their
It was a overhead projector.
overhead projector. So this
Yeah.
is, a computer, but they weren't using it anyway. And they were looking at projecting out what they were going to do. and they went through all some of the things you're talking about. And then they said, I think you even asked a question about
about
solar, and
renewables.
they went,
Oh,
that's nothing,
whatever.
forget it.
Yeah.
And we got up and laughed because that was so frustrating.
Yeah. And the hot dogs weren't any good. So,
Well, you ate a hot dog there.
no.
Oh my
Okay.
God.
So, nuclear during the same period went from 19% to 9%. So, we're beginning to see the decline of nuclear, the elevation of natural gas, the decline of coal. Hydro pretty much remained the same, but wind up to 8.5%, solar now up to about 4%. All right. So, that decade from 2008 to 2018 really was the beginnings of the visual of the decline of nuclear and the dominance of natural gas with some growth within wind and
Yeah.
solar.
Well, natural gas being the
Right.
transition
Well,
drug. But
today, that so if we look at 2022 as more recently, and I would say from 2018 to 2022, we really have seen that go to fuel sources for the electrical grid has really come down to wind, solar, and natural gas. Nuclear, dead. They're not building any new
no,
ones. There's talk about it
they're
every so
making
often.
people
There's talk
pay
about it.
for the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
cleanup
But it's not
theory.
going to happen because it costs two, three, four, five, 10 times as much as all the alternatives. It's just not. People are going to get money from the government and they're going to pretend like it's going to happen, but it's not going to happen. The analogy I like to think of with natural gas or with nuclear is a nuclear power plant is like riding on the back of the tiger. You know, you can't get off
Yeah,
because the cost of building a new nuclear power plant might be $1 billion. The cost of decommissioning it and
right.
fixing it is like $2 billion.
Well,
So they
it
just
doesn't
keep.
happen.
So
It's
there's
not.
lots of problems with that.
No.
So anyway, so we see about a third, a third, a third. So in fact, in 2022, solar was 40%, wind was 34% of all of the new generation created, and natural gas 26%. So three-quarters of everything in 2022 renewable
Yeah.
energy. That's all good. So
But here's the thing.
here's the thing.
Where are we going? Because
Okay, I'm trying to
I
get there.
want the hopeful
All
parts.
right, I'm
Just
getting there.
give me the
No, I mean, the
hopeful.
hopeful part is we've seen this transition over the last 10 years where natural gas was a thing. Those of us in the industry, the renewable energy industry, say natural gas is still a big problem. As you're saying, they've got a lot of clout and now they're trying to pretend because everybody says renewable energy is good. All the public
So let's
opinion polls.
rebrand.
So let's rebrand. Let's
Yeah.
pretend like we're good. It's a bit of greenwashing. But the very hopeful thing is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, called FERC, that oversees all of these permittings and everything. They've recently put out their estimations for the next 3 years. And this is based on utility permitting requests. So it takes
Oh,
that
so
much time for these things
uh
to get built.
but it's cold hard facts.
Right,
That's
right,
yeah.
right. Well, when we look at that, here's what's coming in the next 3 years. Solar will account for around 64% of all of the new electrical generation at the utility scale. This doesn't even count for all the people putting solar on their
On their
homes,
home.
on the commercial businesses, things like that. 64% will be solar, 21% will be wind, and 10% will be natural gas. So now, and then 4% hydro, coal, zero, nuclear, zero. So we're looking at over the next 3 years, we're transitioning to a 90% renewable energy for the new stuff. Now, we still have the embedded base. All of those things are getting older, all of them are phasing out, but we are really quickly, rapidly transitioning. The analogy I like to think about is like with cellular telephones, with the new adoption of technology. I remember I was in the telecommunications industry when cellular phones came around. And of course, the only thing we ever knew is cell phones would never be a thing because they're just not, um, they're not, they're not, sorry, alarm. They're not technologically suitable. They're compared to landlines. Well, in 1983, 0% of the population basically had cell phones. By 2004, 69% of the population had mobile telephones, like the one that just alarmed us, and 86% by 2022 have mobile phones. So in one generation, basically, we went from a communication system that had existed since the days of Alexander Graham Bell to something that does not remotely is not remotely recognizable as
No,
that old
no.
telecommunication system. Well, we're underneath that same process for the electrical grid right now. We're in that beginning phase, a little bit beyond the begin, but with new technology, by the time technology reaches 1% of the embedded base, it has doubled half of the times it needs to double to become the dominant technology.
So
So
there's no stopping it.
there's no stopping it. So, and a good
Is
example,
that a good thing?
yeah, I think so. I mean, we're moving towards renewables, so yeah, we're getting rid of some of that, um, some of that pollution.
Yeah,
Now,
but
electric vehicles are another example of this. Electric vehicles are at that 1 or 2% place, but all of the automobile manufacturers have announced that by 2040, and many of them are now moving it up to 2030, 2025, 2035. I mean, that they will have their entire fleet will be electric by 2035. Um, Maryland just passed a law by 2035. No gasoline engine vehicles will be sold in Maryland. California already has that law. So we're beginning to see that the transportation industry is becoming fully electric. If that electricity is generated through renewable energy sources, which we are transitioning to, then they become essentially non-polluting. Not again from the
I
construction
know,
and the
but wait a
waste
minute, wait a
disposal
minute.
and all
The
of that
thing
other
is,
stuff.
oh, my brain just immediately goes to where's all that energy going to come to? Because it's basically come from because all those cars and all those trucks and all those other things being recharged. And also when people can run anything they want
Yeah,
for free,
sure.
what's going to
How will
happen?
we behave? Will we behave
Like we're drunk at
responsibly?
a bar
No,
for
frat boys
free.
at an open bar. You
That's
know,
right.
that's the way it's going to be. But if you say where is the energy coming from? Well, studies by NASA have shown that the energy, the amount of sunlight that hits the planet Earth is all of the energy that's ever existed in the form of fossil fuels, right? From the dawn of
In one
time,
day it's equal
3 days, three
oh,
days
three
of
days.
sunlight. So by we have consumed half of all the fossil fuels on this planet that have ever existed. Took millions and millions of years to produce. We've done that, but that's the day and a half equivalent of sunlight. So the energy is abundant. Of all the things on this planet, uh, the energy is the only thing that comes to us from off of this planet. So it is an almost unlimited source. Now, that doesn't mean we've seen almost unlimited sources in the past that we've managed to use up, but we are moving towards that day when energy is free. And the other thing that runs out is time.
Is time.
Is time. So you have been listening to When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine with Jay and Annie Warmke. Coming to you from Studio B, WOUB Radio. We want to thank our almost unlimited Emmy Award winning producer, Adam Rich, and we want to thank you for spending just a little bit of time with us. And as your grandmother hopefully told you, the secret to a happy and sustainable life is
Play nice with others, clean up your own mess, and eat your veggies.
all right. Till next time. Bye bye.